It's the Dugar Report. I wish we could have included the first part of this whole thing. The Dugar Report. It's with Michael-Shawn Dugar from The Athletic. Follow Mike on X at Mike Dugar. I can't remember. Are you on Blue Sky now too?
I am. I'm
Is
on
that
there.
Mike Dugar?
Yeah, as far as
Okay.
I know, maybe with some dots and blue skies
Yeah,
after it. I'm not.
they have that weird like the stuff after it is very odd. It looks very very weird. All right, Mike Dugar also on Blue Sky, co-host, also Seahawks Man to Man podcast with our guy Chris Kidd. He's here. We'll talk a little Seahawks here for the next 25 30 minutes or so, and get you caught up on how they're playing and get ready for a huge game against the Green Bay Packers. But what was a huge game last week? Let's just kind of put a bow on it. Not so much breaking down the game, Mike, but I mean that was a playoff game, and boy, that first possession, it looked like Arizona was like it was a different game for Arizona. They were to come out, they looked much tougher and much more together offensively, but then Seattle slowly but surely just took over that game and defensively never looked back. And I think most people agree that one of, if not the most complete game of the year that they had.
Easily their most complete game in my mind, particularly when you adjust for opponent. The other one would probably be at Atlanta, but Atlanta stinks. I didn't really feel good about Atlanta going in, and then I didn't feel any better about them coming out. And the same thing with Arizona. I really thought how the offense performed in week 14 was how Seattle's offense should have performed in week 12. It was actually pretty underwhelming offensively how they looked in that first meeting at home. I viewed Arizona's defense as Buda Baker and a bunch of guys. And that's exactly what they proved to be, in the rematch. Buda had 18 tackles. When he wasn't making a tackle, that's it. The Seahawks were getting a first down. And when Buda was making tackles, they couldn't move the ball, and I expected them to be able to exploit that. They were able to in the rematch. Easily their most complete game. I had a feeling they'd be able to get to Kyler. They didn't sack him very much, but they flustered him. He was just off target all night after that opening drive. So yeah, easily their most complete win. And just from I would say big picture standpoint, that was really encouraging, that both teams needed that game really bad, and Mike Macdonald's team looked like it, because it's kind of a show and prove time for Jonathan Gannon too, the coach of the Cardinals. He's in year 2, but I mean, he ain't won nothing either, and he's getting a full year with Kyler Murray. And that was they've lost 3 straight games. They've fallen down in the division. They've kind of fumbled their season away. And the Seahawks were in a very similar position 3 weeks ago, and they're on a heater. I think if you're on the fence about Mike Macdonald, this stretch right here has been really encouraging. They've had some do or die situations the last month, and they have played like a team in do or die situations, which sometimes is good. They had their backs against the wall. Sometimes you want to see a team play like that. And Arizona is an example of what it looks like when you're doing quite literally the exact opposite.
Why? I mean, listen, it's football, all sports. We can, and we're all guilty of this, Mike. We overcomplicate things a lot. Last week is a huge discussion about the offense, and rightfully so. Just where are they at? Why is it not clicking for them? There were some signs of improvement a little bit with the Jets, but again, you go to the red zone and it's just like, why can't they figure it out? And there's a lot of heat being turned up on Ryan Grubb, and there was just a lot of back and forth about where they are at offensively. And then you get a performance like they had last week. Ken Walker's out. You're thinking, geez, they're not going to be able to do anything with Ken Walker out. Their offensive line plays their best game of the year, and I think it to a degree, it doesn't solve everything, but to a degree it shows you, my God, if you can just block and you can just, get adequate blocking from the 5 guys up front, just how much easier it is for you offensively, throwing the ball and passing the ball. And then lo and behold, your offense looks better. I mean, I don't think Ryan Grubb in a week became some genius or anything. I just think it was the simplest explanation was, boy, Scott Huff's guys up front just played a hell of a football game.
Yeah, it really was guys just out executing the other team, which, yeah, you're right. We overcomplicate it. Sometimes it is just that simple. And Arizona's front is not good. Not to say the Seahawks O-line is a bunch of world beaters, but they are better than the Seahawks front. Like Abe and Charles are just better talents than pretty much everyone on Arizona's front line on defense. That's just not a very talented team. All of their draft picks should be used on defense, I think, in this next draft. But they've played teams that aren't very good either and just haven't looked like that. So I thought that was very encouraging. I thought you could see the pride guys are taking in their performance. And the defense kind of been doing that for a month. It was just very simple as Don't let the guy in front of you block you. Shed your block. Win your one-on-one matchups and coverage. And that's what happened on Sunday for the offense. They were running the same play every every drive, a couple times a drive. Same counter action, guard tackle pull, whether Abe and Sautau were pulling or Charles and Lakin were pulling. Either way, it was the same play, and Arizona could not consistently defend it, and that's why they lost the game. So, I think beyond the X's and O's, which they've made some changes there, it really is just Mike Macdonald has the entire team embracing the urgency of the situation. And I think that's we talked about that in the past, where Mike he's willing to be like, this game is big. This game is, our backs are against the wall. We can't lose. We need to go out there and execute. I do think that it matters. Like I said, they're playing like a team that don't want to lose, and that's the hole they've dug themselves. But again, look around the league, and there are other teams in those similar scenarios who are not playing like that. And the Seahawks are.
Is the way that they played, and again, you don't need to be some football savant to understand what they were doing offensively. I mean, listen, there's gap schemes, there's zone schemes, there's all these the things that you can say, and it makes us all sound smart. I mean, they were. The simplest explanation, they were pulling their linemen more. They were pulling their linemen more than they've done all season long. And these guys, for the most part, are pretty athletic. It's one thing you can look at and go, yeah, these guys can get out and on the move. They did it way more than they've ever done before. Obviously, now it's on film, so the Packers and the Vikings and the Rams and Bears are going to expect to see a little bit more of this. But was it something that they just, it's a nice adjustment by them, and I would expect it would be a scheme that they're going to probably want to use more as they finish out the rest of the season. Certainly a fit for this offensive line in particular.
Yeah, Grubb has decided, and I can kind of see this, that his preferred style of running the ball is just right at you. He doesn't dress it up too much, doesn't really try to get on the perimeter very much and stretch guys out. They're either running in the Jets game, for instance, they had a drive in the third quarter, several drives actually, where they just got under center and just combo blocks right up the gut. Nothing, maybe some motions here and there, but nothing fancy. And it was generally working until they got down in the red zone and Quinnen Williams happened. And in this game, the Arizona game, it was, all right, we're pulling, and some of that is the fronts and the structures. Grubb's IDing that, I think, a little better than he was in the past. And I think what's really happening, what happened in the Jets game, what happened Sunday was it was building towards guys just believing a little bit more, because this is not, nobody here has the benefit of the doubt. And I mean, the coaching staff, like Grubb can tell these guys all these things and like, hey, trust me, if this, then this. But until they see it on Sunday, it's hard to buy in, even if whether you're a veteran or a rookie. And you can see it happening on defense. Mike Macdonald's genius. He'll tell these guys, look, man, when they get to the left hash on 3rd and 4, they're going to run A, B, or C based on the formation. And then it happens, and then they go make plays. And Grubb's getting to that same point where it's like, look, when we get this look, safety does this. If you just do this, boom, we're going to score a touchdown. Jackson Smith and Jigba touchdown being an example, a play they worked on a lot. They knew, like, hey, if Tyler just runs his route to a certain depth, the corner will stay with him. Jackson versus a safety, boom, we've seen that, So it's been building towards that. It wasn't just like, Grubb reinventing the wheel against the Cardinals. I mean, I'll have to do that every week. He is my X factor, Grubb, that is, every week. Because I trust, and this makes sense, I trust Mike Macdonald a little bit more against the opposing OC than I trust Grubb against the opposing DC, right? He's more inexperienced, Grubb is. But if Grubb can win those matchups, the little chess match with the opposing DC, whoever it is, they have a fighting chance every night because of how well Mike has his guys playing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good point you bring up too. Even though Mike Macdonald is young and he still is, what is he, 37?
Yeah, I think so. Something like 36.
It's
something
unbelievable.
Like that.
He's got experience of calling plays, right, in the NFL. And I think that's the one thing that when, the discourse, the talking points there around Grubb is, yes, he was fabulous in college. He's never done it in the pros. And I just think, as a rookie coming in, whatever position you're playing, but let's say quarterback, there's just going to be a learning curve. To how this isn't college anymore. These guys are faster. They're stronger. These coordinators are going to be way more deceptive and trying to confuse you. And I think the same thing is for Ryan Grubb. I don't know if he all of a sudden found it last week. I don't think that's the case. I just think he was able to get to some different plays and run some different stuff because their offensive line played really, really well. And certainly a part of that happens, or it happens to be the case because of Arizona's front. I think a little bit of it is, though, that's the fourth game you saw the majority of these guys play together, right? Oluwatimi, I think that's his fourth game. For Lamea, that was his second straight game. So, again, you've been covering football forever. I mean, continuity with that group of guys, like that's everything. That's everything in this sport. They just need to play together. Yes, they need to be good, be talented, number one. But the number two is they got to play together and have this familiarity with one another. Every good offense line's got that.
And I think on top of that, one thing to bring it back to Grubb, because I do think he is, I cannot overstate his importance. Something he talked to us about last week was learning more about each defensive coordinator and the tree they learned under.
Yeah.
And that is very important, because it's important when trying to figure out what the answers are going to be to the test, because everyone's rooted in something. If you're a Pete Carroll philosophy guy, you're probably going to defer to like, all right, we're just going to make sure no explosives, push come to shove. We don't want anything over our head. And some coordinators come from a tree where they're a little bit more aggressive. We're like, push come to shove, I'm sending the pressure if I need to. Todd Bowles comes from that, and Rex Ryan's, and there's been some other guys where like Wink Martindale, where their default is heat them up, and then there's guys from Vic Fangio's tree where it's also that like, hey, no explosives, keep a shell on it. And when you're trying to learn these guys and say, all right, how are they going to attack us based on maybe their history or their origins, or what's their go-tos when their back's against the wall or in the red zone or on third down or fourth quarter 2 minute. Like Grubb talked a little bit about, diving more into guys' trees and learning how they're going to attack them. One tree he mentioned actually he's been studying more is Mike McDonald's tree. He kind of has one. They're running that same scheme in Tennessee, Miami, Baltimore, with the Chargers. So it's kind of spreading around a little bit. And so once you learn those trees more and those principles, you can attack guys a lot more, because everything is about rules. Pete Carroll used to talk about that a lot. He's like, yeah, people started to figure us out a little bit, but more so they were hiring our coaches and they were teaching them the rules. The worst thing that could have happened for him is Dan Quinn, not just Dan Quinn leaving, but telling the rules to Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta.
Yeah.
That was the issue. You can take the coach, but it's like once you start telling the OCs like, hey, this is how their rules work. Grubb's figuring that out now, and you can see it.
Yeah. What did you make? I think there's going to be some out there would say, God, I thought there were some times he could have pulled the trigger and been a little bit more aggressive. What'd you make of Geno's performance? I sat back when I watched it, and then I'm not a psychopath like you and rewatch the games. Okay. I don't do that. But, I sat back and just thought about it more, and I thought, that just was a really, really good game. It just was really solid. He just made the right plays. When he had to go deep, and he threw that nice pass, that touchdown pass to Jason. But I know it seems like the easiest pass in the world. I love the dump down to the running back. And Tom Brady won 7 championships by doing that. You just dump it to your running back and let that guy get you, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 yards, softens everything up, and now you're looking at 2nd and 4. My God, the whole playbook's open at 2nd and 4, right? I don't know. I mean, I know it wasn't as, throwing for 300 plus yards and slinging it all around the place, but took care of the football. I don't know. It was just a solid game from Smith, I thought.
Yeah, it was what was needed to win the game. So every game is a different story. There have been some games in the past where it's like, we can't run it. We honestly can't even block, and we're not stopping the other team. So you got us today. So like pretty much every Detroit game, pretty much over the last few years.
It is. Yeah.
The Cowboys game last year. He's had there's been several. Honestly, the Niners games have been like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that they've lost in particular. So this game didn't need that. They could run it. They could stop the run. They could limit explosive. They could generate turnovers. And I do think that is very similar to being a point guard on a basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
That is part of the gig. You got to realize what you need. Like, okay, maybe we need to slow the tempo down. Like we're gassed or something. Or, maybe my small forward hasn't touched the rock in a little bit. Make sure I get him a touch. Maybe we need to push the pace. The other team's tired. Let's go. And Geno's actually always been good at that. The problem is the game scripts have always been the same for most of his starting. It's like, hey man, we can't block, we not running it, and our defense stinks. So go throw for 300, and as we've seen, that's just not tenable. For as good as I think Geno is, that he just can't do that every week.
Yeah, it was a minus the really having to win it in the fourth quarter, which they didn't really have to win it in the fourth quarter. To me, it was a real Russell Wilson-like performance. I mean, it didn't look the same because Wilson wasn't really a dump down guy. I mean, but it just was, I don't know, it was efficient. He completed 80% of his passes, and I'm looking at like the numbers, like 80% completion, 230 yards, and a touchdown. Didn't turn it over. It just was, it just 102 passer rating. It just was it's not a fantasy football wow you stats, but it was just that's the type of performance and, the type that you get from a group up front that blocks for you. And then that's just efficient. It was just efficient how he played.
Well, and no sacks, which are, he controls that quite a bit. And there was only 2 passes defense. And one of them, they credited the guy who was guarding Tyler when he just drops the go ball, which is not like, that guy didn't do anything. Tyler just dropped
the one in the end zone.
Yeah. That's technically a pass defended or whatever on the stat sheet. The other one was a guy who legitimately knocked the ball away from DK. So he really only put the ball in harm's way one time on those 30 attempts, in addition to being efficient too. And Geno's, I thought it was really good to see Geno do that because we had seen him kind of force the issue in that Niners game, the issue in that Rams game, force the issue in the first Cardinals game, throwing a pick in the end zone where it's like, dude, we being like the rest of the team is actually playing okay. In all 3 of those games I mentioned, the defense played good, really well in that Cardinals first matchup. So if Geno had just been checked down Charlie a little bit more in those games, instead of feeling like he had to put the team on his back, they probably would have won those games. Not to say that's Geno's fault, but when we can all see how Geno could have that attitude, there have been some games where it's on his shoulders to go make things happen. And then we've kind of seen the last couple of weeks, it's actually not. Now with the way the defense is playing, as long as the guys on special teams catch the ball, Geno can just manage a game here and there.
Well, what I like about when he just dumps it down, and I think he can do that to Walker when Walker comes back. We'll get to Walker and his health and his status for the game against Green Bay. But what I like about it, it really is, it's like old school, right? Watching Mike Leach. You and I being both Wazoo grads, okay? Can't really run the ball, but what was their short little passing game to the running backs, to Max Borghi, to Wicks, to Jamal Morrow? I mean, those little dump passes were just an extension of running the ball. And, Zach Charbonnet to get almost 70 yards receiving, by just dumping it down to him and taking a 2-3 yard pass and turning into 6. I don't know. I just think it's a great way there to soften the defense. For Geno, I have been all over the place with him. I can't make up my mind. And I hate doing it week in and week out. Garofalo has asked me this question all the time when we've discussed this. And it's his favorite question. And he's like, I want you to close your eyes. And then I want you to pretend you're the Super Bowl media day. Okay, wherever they hold it. And then I want you to open up your eyes. I want you to look up in the rafters. Do you see him up there? Like, how they have all their banners hanging, the faces. Do you see him? And I'm like, because he's always like, I don't see him up there. To his point of like, I just don't think he's a guy you can win a championship with. And then I, for the most part, answer yes to it. I get performances like last week, and I know I'm putting too much into it last week, but if you put, a good team around him, strong running game, offensive line, solid defense that they have right now, he is a damn good. He can at times be a really, really good quarterback. And then I can kind of inch my way to thinking maybe I look up there and I squint. Maybe I do see a little. Maybe I do see him up there. I'm going to ask you the same question. Can you see him up there?
I do. And let's do another exercise. Okay. Let's go with, so the Seahawks made the Super Bowl as the NFC representative in 2014. Yeah. Let's go through the quarterbacks of the NFC representatives since then. See if we can do it in order. Then we have Cam Newton, I think the very next year. Matt Ryan, the very next year after that. Nick Foles, Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, Jalen Hurts, and Brock Purdy. Like, how many of those guys are definitively better than what we've seen from Geno Smith? Because that's really what you're at. If he can be, whether you win the game is whatever, but that's how, getting there is,
The 3 in a row, which was Foles. Who did you have? Foles, Goff, and
Ryan was before Foles, and then Jimmy G was after Goff.
Jimmy G. Yeah, I mean, if you could see those guys up there, I guess I could see him up there. I guess I could. I mean, it's he's just an interesting topic. It's just sitting around having a beer in your hand and discussing him, because it's very polarizing with him. There's not many. Well, there's a few people that are on the fence of it. There seems to be opinions, pretty strongly one way or the other. I guess my opinion with Geno Smith would be this: that I don't know how many quarterbacks in the league are better than him. I mean, there's, I can probably. I mean, I'm not going to bore everyone with the exercise of going through all of them, but I think that they're probably going to be in a position where they will have to pay him. I don't think they're going to pay him what he's going to be owed here in that cap hit that's going to be set forth for him this offseason. I think they should do something friendly that brings that number down. I don't know where that would be, Mike. I don't know what's fair to him. I know what he probably wants. I mean, he wants to be paid probably $50 million. I don't think that would be wise to do. 25 to 30, yeah. I mean, for me, I think that's fair. It's $25 million. But again, I understand in the discussion what we're talking about with quarterback money. And then the other side of it is at some point, based on his age, and I would say this about if like Russell Wilson was still here, they've got to find somebody with this draft or the next draft or something that they can at least in a year or two turn to be the future of this team. That's a long-winded. I was just kind of rambling there. Let's
add. Let's assume Goff is added to that list this year too. Let's assume that he's the list of quarterbacks. The NFC. Like, think of what these guys have had around them too. That if Goff makes it, let's assume Goff does again. So that would be the second time in like 7 years or something like that Goff has taken two teams just to the Super Bowl. And then go look at the similarities. He's had top 3 OCs in both of those runs, top 3 O lines in both of those runs.
Sure.
Multiple 1,000-yard pass catchers. I think Woods, Cup, Cooks might have even done it one of those years at the Rams. Obviously, he's got Amon-Ra, all-pro tight end, multiple 1,000-yard capable Pro Bowl type running backs. Like, I think situation too, which is why I also named those quarterbacks. Like, the reason I answer yes to that Garofalo hypothetical is I feel like if you give Geno what those guys were given to get there, the 2019 Niners swap Jimmy G for Geno Smith.
Yeah.
Do the Niners go to the Super Bowl? Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah. And they probably win the thing.
Well, I mean, he's a better quarterback than Jimmy Garoppolo for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many, 2018, Jared Goff was like fine, it just feels like, shoot, even that 2020 Bucks team, look how loaded that team was, that went there. Antonio Brown, Gronk, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and that nasty D-line, a top 5 O-line. Like, yeah, I think, could be, you just got to give them the right stuff, which could be said for like quite literally every quarterback in the league.
Sure. Do you think something in that $25-30 million is that insult? Do you think that would be insulting?
Oh yeah. The economics of it, whether we think it's insulting, like look at the number.
We have to remove ourselves from it. Just as a quarterback would look at it.
Like there's guys who probably shouldn't even still be starting or who aren't starting that are making way more. Kirk Cousins making $100 million guaranteed over 2 years. He probably shouldn't be starting anymore. He just can't throw a touchdown at all right now. Daniel Jones is already off the team that gave him $40 million a year. Look how much guys like Trevor Lawrence are making, or even Jordan Love, who's probably about as good as Geno, is making like $250 million or something.
Jordan Love is making $55 a year.
55 a year, and it has he's throwing more touchdowns than Geno this year.
He's younger though. I mean, that's the thing with him. He's like way younger.
Well, even that's why I bring up Kirk. Kirk is Geno's age, if not older, and coming off of a Achilles tear, got $100 million guaranteed. Like, for better or worse, Geno's agent is going to wisely point to these contracts and say, this is the market for my guy. If you want to tell me screw off, that's whatever, but this is the market for my guy.
Yeah, but I just wonder what, the problem with that I think he'll run into based on age is going to be leverage. I just don't know what leverage he's going to have, because I just don't know how many teams based on his age are going to spend that money for him, because most of those teams aren't just a quarterback away. They already have the guy.
Yeah, I don't think any team has ever. I've kind of taught myself that over the years. I don't think anyone's really a quarterback away. I think even the Bucks adding Brady, they needed to add other stuff too, including like 2 Hall of Fame pass catchers, and Gronk and AV. Yeah, I think the issue for Seattle though is going to be on the flip side. Well, what else are you going to do?
Sure,
And that's what every team has to ask themselves when you want to get rid of the guy you got. It's what else are you? That's why the Giants paid Daniel Jones. In part, they believed him at the time, but they also had pick like 26. What else were they going to do?
Well, I do think though, depending what happens. Again, whether you like the player or not, he's having a renaissance year. I think what the one thing that the leverage for Seattle would be like, there's Sam Darnold on the market. We could always dip our toes into that one. I just don't know. For Geno, I just don't know what teams Seattle would bid against. And it's not to say just, because Kirk Cousins makes this money, I wouldn't want them financially for any player to make some type of financial mistake where you're committing so much money to one particular player when you base it, on his age. What is Geno right now? 32? He'll be 33-ish? I thought he was older than that.
I think he's older than that. I think
older
like
than that, right?
34? Something like that?
That's not. I'm looking at the wrong age.
Yeah, I think his birthday is in
right,
October.
34.
Yeah, 34. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's teams bidding against themselves in a lot of ways. I think Atlanta was just doing that. I think the Giants were just doing that.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous game. Those teams probably regret those contracts, and they looked bad in real time too.
Guarantee Atlanta does right now, especially after drafting a guy, and they're like, "Now we're stuck with this. How do we get out of this?"
Yeah, and I also think though, the decision you have to make too with the quarterback is not just is this guy? Can we upgrade from Geno, which is already tough? Can you upgrade from Geno and upgrade everything else? Assuming you don't win the Super Bowl.
Right.
When you lose your last game, you're going to be like, well, we need A, we need B, we need C. We got to pay this guy, cut this guy. You got to do the math. Is it worth it to try to do all that stuff you already got to do? Pay Ernest Jones, figure out what to do with DK, figure out how you're going to handle Cross, Reek, Abe, Ken Walker. Not to say you have to pay all these guys. These are just decisions that you have to, they're part of the math. You got to figure out all that. Do you want to have to do all that and try to get better and upgrade at quarterback all in one offseason? That's crazy. That's just not feasible for so many teams, which is why they default to their guy. And then the teams who try to do that stuff, who try to make their GM Superman, they end up falling flat on their face, a lot of the time. So I think that's both teams can look, both sides, Geno and John can look at each other and wait for the other one to blink. Understandably so, I think. There's really strong arguments for both parties in that sense.
A couple of house cleaning items. So what do we expect? Do we expect to see Walker on the field Sunday night against the Packers?
I would be surprised. Like if you're not practicing on Wednesday and they're still doing tests on you and your day to day, and it's not a playoff game on Sunday. I do think they try not to admit this, into the math. But when guys are playing well, you're afforded the luxury of like, all right, we don't want 60% of Ken if we can just get 100% of Zach and Kenny. And I know they've done that math before. Shoot, DK even admitted to it while he sat out the 2 games he sat out. He was like, me not at 100% is not as good as my guys at 100. So, it's like, let's take it easy. I think they could do the same math with Ken because where they want to go, they're going to need Ken. And calves are dangerous. You play with a tricky calf. I mean, people saw what happened to Christian McCaffrey in Buffalo. The thing just exploded, So you do got to be careful. Cold weather playing with a calf injury. I would be surprised if we see him. I wouldn't rule it out, but I would be. I think I have him in one of my leagues. He's on my bench in fantasy, so I maybe view it through that lens. I'm sure that's how a lot of people want to view it. That's
how everybody does it. It's gonna be a fun game, hell of a test against a really good football team with a quarterback that can light you up. With a quarterback though, we'll turn it over. I can't wait to see on Sunday the chess match between Mike Macdonald. He's done a good job in the last few games of confusing some pretty good quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, and then of course a future Hall of Famer and Aaron Rodgers. And I can't wait to see what he has in store there for Jordan Love. And then I think the test for this offensive line, we'll see how much they've improved against a very much a better defensive front than what they saw last week there in Arizona, and a team that's very stout there against the run. And it's Sunday night. It's a national audience. It is these two teams get together, and something weird always happens when these two fan bases and these two teams get together. Be sure to follow Mike there on Twitter. Also Blue Sky for the very latest there on Ken Walker. Follow him at Mike Dugar. Read all of his work. Going to ask him what he's got cooking right now up The Athletic. Get a subscription to The Athletic if you don't have it yet. Also check out the Man-to-Man podcast, Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast that he does there with Chris Kidd, wherever you find your podcasts. All right, what do you got up? What do you got cooking right now at The Athletic?
Since he's been balling, decided to write about Kobe Bryant this week. Just not only that he's been playing well, but also I do think he's like emblematic of what Mike Macdonald wanted to be in year one, which is a legitimate meritocracy where everything is earned from his coaching staff, just not the staff not being a bunch of his buddies from his Rolodex of former coworkers, to legitimately saying, hey, if you play well in practice, I'm going to give you a chance, and if you help us win, you keep the job, even if you were an injury replacement. Mike Macdonald referred to Kobe as an example of how they want to build this thing. Mm-hmm. I do think that's important. You want to culture is hard to measure. Kobe's ascension is culture. It is saying you practice well, you stack multiple productive days on special teams, on defense, you come in with the right attitude, and when it's time, we're going to put you in the game, and we're going to believe in you. And if you help us win, you stay there. I think that's important it's important for all coaches, but I mean, there's so many politics in football. It's like probably a breath of fresh air for some of these guys to see the accountability of oh, you're fumbling kickoffs, you're gone.
Yeah.
Oh, but you're making plays on the ball, then you start. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're practicing well, then you start. Oh, you're not practicing well, you ride some pine. That I was just talking to Artie Burns about that. He's like, yeah, we need that. Artie's I think 31 or something, so he's been around the league. So. I wrote about Kobe being in a window into that. We got our film breakdown, Chris and I, on the Seahawks Man-to-Man pod, YouTube exclusive, coming on every Friday. Make sure you check that out. Right now, we have our One Big Thing / opponent preview out now on all platforms, wherever you're watching, listen to this. We're available. We just interviewed the homie Matt Schneidman, who covers the Packers for The Athletic, does a great job. He predicts a Seahawks win, actually, so he got some optimism on the show there.
All right, there he is, Michael-Shawn Dugar with us every single Thursday. Again, follow him on Twitter. I keep saying Twitter. It's X, but I always call it Twitter. Blue Sky at Mike Dugar. Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast, wherever you find your podcast, and, of course, The Athletic. And, of course, you can find this full episode up on YouTube. When you're there, please subscribe. Check it out later in case you came in late on Apple and Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. And, of course, always up at pucksports.com. All right, Mike, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Peace.